Hello everybody and welcome. In this section we're going to be talking about LookDev, look development. So we're going to be developing our look. What does that mean? It means we're going to be creating shaders, we're going to be applying textures, we're going to be lighting our scene, we're going to do a quick test camera, and then start setting up our renders so we can, all of that is going to take us to our final image. So let's go for it. Hello everybody, welcome to LookDev. We're going to be taking a look at adding some lights, we're going to render some things, applying shaders. It's going to be a lot of fun, so let's jump into it. This is the scene we're going to be using. We have backdrop, a grid, sphere, and some other funky looking spheres here with another grid. So let's take a look. I'm going to turn on a light. In this case, it's going to be my HDR light. I will talk about this just in a second, just so we get something in our render preview. Here we go. So you can see the sphere in the render looks quite different than in the viewport, and that is because it already has a shader applied. The texture, all the textures here I got from Megascans. They have some very high quality textures. So that's the scene. You can see the spheres here. These are primarily used just to test things out, just to see how everything looks with 100% reflections with this chrome ball, how our white surfaces will look like, how our black surfaces will look like. And then we have this color chart here that is usually used to color balance or white balance the image later. And these are all just checkers, just so we make sure that our image is in the correct space. And so nothing is being blown out. You can see here this image is a bit white, so if we just drop down our exposure, you can see there's still information, all the information there. So nothing is actually clipping. But that's how you would use those checkers, just to check. Anyway, that's our scene. That's the sphere. I turned on our HDR light in this case, so I'm using Arnold, or in this particular case, it doesn't really matter. You have other render engines. Mantra is a native render engine with Houdini, but I'm using Arnold in this case. So Arnold, and you can go to Arnold Light, and you have a bunch of different lights here. So in this case, we just added a light, so I'm gonna bring it up a bit. I think it's something like 8. And if I crank its intensity, we will start seeing the result here. So that's cool. I will remove this light for now, just so, because we're gonna look at lights in a second. So our HDR here is a texture. It's a HDR, means for high dynamic range images, and it's a spherical texture that wraps around our scene. So if I remove the backdrop and re-render, you will see our clouds appearing in the background. And of course, they're not appearing. It happens every time. So it's because I have my contribution here set to 0 for the camera, and here we are. We can see the clouds like so. So these clouds in this spherical image is wrapping around our image like so. If I step into my camera, zoom out a bit, and start rotating, you will see that's how our clouds are looking. And let me just check here. I'm gonna use latitude and longitude. So that's gonna change it so it's mapped correctly to the sphere. Just have to re-render quickly. But that's what we're using currently to map, well, to light our scene. And these clouds, and there's a bunch of different variations of this, but these clouds are very soft, and that's gonna reflect in our image as well. This is usually a very good first base to apply to our image. So let me go back to my camera and open this to latitude, longitude. So let's re-render from our main camera. So I'm gonna go with 1. Here we go. So that's how it looks like. I'm gonna put back my backdrop just so the image, you can see we're getting some very cool details here, very not details but reflections coming from the HDR, and that's what we're looking for. Let me just quickly re-render again and focus on this section. When we're doing LookDev like we are now, all of that has to be taken into account. So we have to check at how our ground, how our materials are gonna react to our HDR or any other light, just to see them in different scenarios. And you can see we're getting some very cool details here from this texture, which is very high res, very cool. So let's go back, put back our backdrop. All right, cool. So when it comes to rendering, we can actually split, we can do a few different passes. So I'm just gonna quickly show you. I have a specular direct here, and I have a diffuse direct. So and both of them together are just our combined color. And the reason why you would like to do that is because later in comp, you're gonna see that if we split this in different passes, we actually have full control. Instead of re-rendering something, if we want, for instance, if we would like this ball, this sphere to be even more wet looking, to have even more reflections, we could adjust that in comp, or vice versa. If you would like this to be less wet, we can do that as well. And I can quickly show you that if I jump into Nuke. This is just the base geometry render. This is the comp that we're going to be looking at later. And you can see I have all the different passes separated here, like so. And if we go back here, later you then combine them together. And it's not just the different passes, but we have different AOVs here. So these are passes within passes, which would just look like this. So let's say for our lights, we would create a separate pass for our lights, a separate pass for our HDR. So for headlights, HDR, and our environment light. So we do this because later we can then have full control, like so. So I decided to make the headlights orange, and because I have that separate pass, I can just make them whatever color I want. It's very easy to change. The same goes for our HDR image, and same goes for, actually I think this is our HDR, and then this is the environment light. So you can change the environment light like so. All right, very cool. So let's get back to Houdini. The way we can do this is on, well, actually, let me just turn on the other lights that we have in the scene. I'm gonna turn this one off, turn the point light. Here we go. So that looks pretty cool. You can see we're getting more specular here. Right now it's catching a bit more of some of the areas on our shader. And this is just a simple overhead point light. If I enable our quad light and maybe boost it up a bit, we're gonna get a nice orange tinted light coming from the left. This would be our key light. So this would be our top light, and this one would be our key light coming from the side. We can, if I go out, this is how the light looks like. If we change the size of this light, let's say if we make it very small, the shadows usually get a lot sharper, and vice versa. If you make it a lot bigger, the shadows are gonna get, you can see the shadow here is very sharp because the light source is actually quite small. If we change this to 20 by 20, the shadows will get very soft. You can see how everything changed. We can also see our light here on the left. But everything got much softer. And the shadow here is actually coming from our point light, so we can change the radius, set it to 20, and you can see now our shadow got a lot softer, maybe even too soft. Oops, let's just quickly re-render. sometimes, yeah, sometimes you need to, let's go back down to 2. Yes, all right, here we go. We're back in business. I'm just gonna remove the contribution for our left light, or actually I kind of like it, so I will leave it out. So I'm gonna duplicate this light. And I'm gonna duplicate it, go into it. So now we are driving the light, and I'm gonna create a backlight. You can see where the scene is automatically updating here. And this backlight is going to be a bit more sharp, so I'm going to scale it down, and let's make it a bluish color. And maybe up the intensity a bit, so now we're going to get a nice backlight happening. This quad is also, you know, shining the light on our backdrop. There's a bunch of different ways to remove that I'm not going to go into right now, but you can also use a spotlight. With a spotlight, you would be able to control the cone 100%, and you just get more control like that. So you can change it from a quad to a spotlight. And now we have our cone angle here. And you can see now we're literally just hitting our sphere and not the background. We can also change the spot radius and lens radius. All right, so let's make this just a bit smaller. So just a tiny bit more. So we have a soft shadow here, but this is still quite harsh. So let's change this penumbra angle. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. So this will soften out the edge shadow as well. Probably need to re-render again. Sometimes when you change the settings, you just have to re-render just so all the settings get reapplied. So here we go. All right, so that's pretty cool. I'm gonna turn off this spotlight so you can see now we kind of have full control, and we have our little orange light here. Another light that I wanted to show you guys is, and let me turn off everything and let's go back to our camera, is the gobo light, and turn it on. This light is quite special because it's using a texture, and that's what I'm using here to create these pockets of light. So if we go here, these pockets of light, I wanted to emulate the shadows and pockets of light coming from a very cloudy day. And that's how he did it. That's how I did it with that gobo. Go back, you can see we start to get those pockets of light appearing. I'm just going to remove the backdrop in this case. It's going to be more visible. And just gonna turn the exposure up, and you can see we're getting those pockets. And how this works is you just set this to a spotlight and go under filters. You can apply shaders inside your lights. And in this case, I was just using this noise texture that is just a basic, very basic noise. And that you can see it here. That's how the noise looks like. And that's where the light is gonna shine through, and then in the shadow parts, it's gonna, you know, be shadowy. Anyway, that's how it looks like. And those are the different types of lights you can use. I'm just gonna put back my HDR and probably my, well, let's just leave it. Let's put the point light on as well. And our backdrop. So let's go and take a look in the shader for our sphere. Another re-render just so we get the backdrop in. This is the Arnold renderer. I'm just going to change this specular to 0 just so it's a bit faster. I'm going to go to progressive rendering just so we get the results quicker. Here we go. Don't worry about these settings. Every render engine has a bit of a different UI and different settings that are exposed here. So I'm not going to bore you with all of that. And let's get into our shaders. So this is our test rock shader. You know, inside, that's how it looks like. It's nothing special. This is kind of a basic setup for creating shaders. And let's see what happens when I turn this off. And I'm gonna put this to the left so it's a bit bigger. Oh no, we lost the color. What's happening? So I was using a texture here. If we quickly take a look at it, show images. It's called an albedo texture. And that texture is what is giving us the color. You can see all the other maps that we're using here are actually black and white, except this one, that is our normal map. And that's going to determine where our bump is happening on the shader or on our sphere here. So that's our albedo. That's what gives the color. This one is controlling the specularity. You remember when I was looking at this? If we remove this, let's see what happens. It's fully specular now because we're not using any masks. So the whole shader is actually just uniform. So if I turn off this specularity now without using the proper map for it, it's going to be completely dark because we don't have any specularity. And vice versa, if we go up, it's going to be completely specular and super shiny. All right. So let's go back to our combined color map. If we remove, let's see, we don't need this one, don't worry about that. And if we remove our bump, we still have some displacement happening because we still have our displacement map. If we remove this one as well, we're gonna go back to zero, and this will actually look like it looks in the viewport. You know, just a simple little sphere. There we go. It's a bit bright. Just gonna tone it down a bit. So if I go back and put this into normal, we will start to see details reappearing here. So that's what that funky blue and violet image is doing. It's giving us those very cool details. And the shader on the ground is using the same, well, the ground is using the same shader, so you can see the details reapplied here. So that's how they look like. Very cool. And if I put back our texture in the base color, re-render, you will see we're gonna get our colors back. Here we go. Which just this by itself, in many cases, that would be enough. You can see we're getting a lot of cool details. It looks quite photorealistic. I like it. So let's start putting in the other maps. So this one, we're gonna put into our specular. And our specular roughness. And in this case, I would just use this and this. And quickly re-render. So this will start giving us back our specular map. So that's where it is. And you can see our map is actually, wherever our map, when I was showing you those black and white maps, wherever it's white, we're gonna get specularity. Where it's dark, we're not gonna get specularity. We can change this with our color correct. So if I gamma up, you will see everything becomes specular. And this gamma will actually determine, if I slowly go down with it, you will see how it's changing the image. And now if I maybe push back on our exposure, maybe go back to 0, you can see very clearly what that map is doing. If I go even lower, it's a bit too low, 2, maybe 5. And let's go higher with the exposure, maybe 5, too high. Contrast, lower contrast. So you can see our specularity is now applied. And even if I remove it from here, you will see an even bigger result if I push the specular up. So that's pretty cool. So let's leave it at that. We got a different look. You can see it's still doing the specular map in between the cracks. So that's giving us a very cool result here. Very nice. I like it. Very proud of this. So let's plug in our displacement, and that will change the image quite a bit. I love playing with displacement maps. They are amazing. Oh, here we go. So that looks very cool now. The displacement is, you can see it's not applying any displacement in our viewport. That's because this displacement is actually happening in render time. And we can change different settings here in the displacement. We can make it even higher. Like so. So that looks pretty badass. And you can see it's changing it on our ground as well because it's the same shader. And the amount of displacement, so this is the amount of displacement, but actually our sphere has to be subdivided also at render times to get to this result. So if I put this to none, we will still be getting displacement, but not as much because our sphere doesn't have enough typology. It doesn't have enough of, let's say, its resolution is not big enough to get all of those tiny details. So this is what we get. This could still work in a lot of cases, and it does, because I used it here because I knew that I will be using depth of field. My displacement was not that high res. It was very low res, just so it was giving me a bit of that bumpiness. This is the reason I did that is because I knew that depth of field would kind of render everything invisible, and it takes longer to render with displacement. When you're subdividing a big chunk of your area or your ground, that will take a bit longer on your render because it has to subdivide everything at render times. Okay, you can see it takes just a bit longer. All right, so that's pretty cool. Love it. So that's kind of the basics of shaders, how you apply textures, and then how you would render. Another cool thing that we can do is if we go to this quad light, I'm just gonna turn it on, turn off the HDR so we get the full. Actually, let's turn on the point light is make it a bit brighter. That's too bright. Yeah, sounds good. So our quad light, let's make this a bit brighter. And put this to 10, so it's a bit sharper. All right, so we need to put the contribution, put this to 0. I'm gonna call this or light. So this orange light, this is going to be our AOB. So if we go to the render, and this is like I was showing you before, that's just going to be a separate pass that we are going to have more control later in comp. So here, oops. Here I was already using those specular and diffuse. They are here. So if we go up, say PPA, orange light, re-render, we're gonna get that light separate. So later in comp, like I was showing you, you can then just modify it. If you don't like the orange, you can change it to blue or whatever other color. So here we go. That's that light, just that light being separated from the other lights that we have here as well. And we can do the same for our point light, right? So point, and we just go here, say the same thing. This is just like I said, a specific thing you have to do in Arnold. Don't worry about it. It's not really the point. All right, so now we have our point light and we have our orange light. Isn't that cool? And then we can look at them combined. So that's how you would start doing LookDev on your lighting as well. So we looked at how you would do LookDev on your shaders, on your asset here. Our asset in this case is just this sphere and the ground. But let's take a look at something more concrete. Our ship. Yay! Let's render the ship. Let's see what the ship has. All right, that's how the ship looks like right now. Just to make it a bit more shiny, I'm gonna turn this on. Now it's gonna look way more metallic. Just gonna re-render quickly, and I will turn off the point light and turn back our HDR. Nope, it's not right. All right, it's gonna get right, trust me. Here we go. I'm just gonna turn this off, lower the exposure. So that's how our ship looks like. I didn't do a lot of texturing on the ship, again, because I knew it's gonna be very dark and the textures won't be very visible. I didn't even bother creating a separate material for the glass, because you would probably have to do that. You would just group this and create a separate material for the glass and maybe for the guns. But in my case, I was a bit lazy and I didn't do that. So let's go to our ship shader. That's how it looks like. It's a bit bigger, not that big. It's still quite manageable. So let's put it here on the left where we have a bit more space. All right, ship shader. Let's see where we're at. Let's bring in our texture. So this would be a texture that I just applied on the whole ship. It just has some scratches. It has some grungy maps and some other kind of shapes to it. So that would just create like a base color. So our ship is not just a shiny chrome ball. So that's one pass that I did. A second pass that I did is I applied some kind of deterioration on the edges. So let's apply that one. So it looks like that. It's quite modifiable. Right now it's inverted just because I wanted to show you how that would look like. But you can see this creates very cool edge wear. And if we go here and invert it, let's see what we get. You see now it's inverted and we would start getting very cool details happening here on the edges, almost like the edges were worn down. And we can change this again if we go from convex to concave, re-render. Let's see what we get. And I will show you how this mask actually looks like, but it's looking at the curvature of our geometry. And you can see now it's just going to do it in between. If we put our spread to a bit lower, 8, you can see now it's doing it just where our edges are. And it looks very cool here on the gun as well. We can change the color of this easily. We can make it orange if we want to, but that's really not the point. And we just want it to have a bit of color variation. It doesn't have to be too dark, right? And what this mask is, if I just quickly show you here, it just looks like this. This is a mask that is procedurally generated for us with this curvature. I'm plugging in some noises just so it breaks the edges. And let's look at convex again. This is gonna invert it essentially. Cool. So I'm gonna leave it like this because just because I like it. Let's increase the range to 1.5. Yeah, it's only 2 to 1. I will then increase this range or decrease it. I think I'm plugging in the wrong one. Yeah, that's the one. So you can see how that would be changing. We go back to 1, it would give us a very crisp edge. If we go lower a bit, it's gonna give us a bit more of that white areas. Re-render. There we go, that's what I wanted, just a bit more of that. Okay, let's leave it like that. The last thing that I did was I added a bit more of that wear down material. So I added another texture that would just be scratches on top of everything. So you can see that would give us this kind of details. And let's quickly go to Let's go and increase the resolution of our camera to something like 4K. Now it's going to take a bit longer to render and the image is going to be a bit bigger, but you will see that we're going to get much more. Let's just focus on this area, otherwise this is going to take too long. You can see our image is getting much more crispy in terms of resolution because it's much higher res. And now you're going to be able to see all of that image. All of that, all of the textures that we applied, and that's what we get. I think that looks pretty cool. So that's how you would do LookDev on, another asset. In this case, our ship. The texture looks like that. If I quickly, here we go. So it's one of these textures. That's the gobo noise before, and this, it just has scratches essentially to it, just like you see here. And they're always black and white images. They are. All right, that's cool. That's cool. Let's go back to our HD. It's going to change quite a bit now. A lot smaller. All right, cool. So that's it for our LookDev with our assets. I just wanted to quickly show you how you would do. Oh, I need to stop rendering. How you would do that on your volumes. So here we have the volumes, and that's a sneak peek of how the volume looks like. Let's see. So these are our volumes, and let's go to our rendering. So you can see here when I was rendering, the volumes and clouds and geo and our atmosphere are actually different passes. So let me quickly show you how that looks like. So if I go to our geo pass, you can see it's just going to be rendering our geometry with nothing else applied. If we go to our Atmos pass, I love this pass. It's just going to give us a very, very cool, moody, atmospheric image. You can do a lot of that in comp as well to get a similar kind of effect. But in this case, I really wanted the headlights to be visible in the fog. So that's how they look like. And we also have different lights here. Oh, not render. That's not, I pressed the wrong thing. I have different lights and different passes like before. You can see this is just that fog light. This is the environment light. These are just the headlights and so on. And it's the same kind of logic. You would just split a lot of your passes in a lot of your lights into different passes like here. So you can see this is just the spotlights. So you have ultimate control later in comp. So let's go back to our smoke pass. And let's look at this explosion. These are the explosions here. All right, so that's our volume. You can see we have that crispy chicken shader going on. Looks very cool. Let's get into the front. So the material is actually being applied here. It's just a bit different. Again, it's all specific. That's the shader that is giving us this crispy chicken look. I'm not going to go too much into it. It's not the part of this LookDev workshop, but we do cover all of that in our explosion workshop. All right, cool. So let me try this with a very standard basic volume shader just to see what we get and what we can do to make it a little better. Volume, plug this in, re-render, and I'm assuming it's gonna look horrible. Yeah, looks beautiful, beautiful. Exactly what we want. Lower the density, and this is what we get. So yeah, doesn't look that appealing, to be honest, if we compare it to what we had before. So what we can do is, to fix this a bit, is bring in our own data. So if we go to volume, load. So we're going to be sampling our temperature that we got from the sim. So we get our temperature and we plug it into our emission. So this is going to be our emission scale. So instead of using emission just at basic 1, a very linear value, we're going to change it to temperature. And we can start remapping this. Let's say we put it to 20 you will see now that this is actually changing. Put it back to, well, let's keep it at 1 for now. What we're gonna do is create our map. It's gonna be a float, and this as our input, and we wanna plug this into the temperature. So now we can actually control how our temperature field is distributed. So, and you can start changing a few values here, and we're gonna get to a similar result. Not the same, but kind of with this method. And let's see, put down a multiply here, just so it's a bit more visible, put 10. So yeah, it's a bit noisy. It's not the best. But you can see what we're looking at here. Like, we want to get to some of those. We don't want all the values to just be bright like this. We want it to be a bit more. We want some of the black, the darker areas, like here, to come through, right? So that's what we're trying to achieve with this method. And we can get to we can get it in a good spot, to be honest, but it takes a lot of tinkering with the values to get there. But yeah, if we just look at this one for just as a reference, we got something. It's something. But that's how you would get these volumes and those fields in, and then start modifying them like that. But you can see it's like a night and day difference. And this is not using any lights. It's just using fields like other BDB data to get to this. All right, so we also have an emission pass here that will only show us the emissions. So if we go to our smoke pass, output, and again here we can plug in all of that, and we have AOV 5 emission, and that will help us later in comp to just select the emission and glow, put additional glow on top of it. If we look at our scene just a bit more, you can see I have a bunch more lights. These are just lights for our headlights. I'm using rivets. This will essentially just use the point transformation data on our light and apply our light. You can see it here. Make it a bit bigger. Is it viewport? I can scale 20. That's our light, and it's gonna move with our spaceship. So that's cool. So that's how I'm doing the headlights. All the other lights are some additional lights for our fog. This is for our gobo, and I'm rendering the HDR separately, just as a background, and you will see that in comp later. An interesting pass was this Atmos pass that I was showing you before. Where is it? Atmos. So this is this pass. And this is interesting because what I'm doing is I am essentially just putting a big box of a big volume box on everything. And this will create all of those volumetrics that you see here. And that's a very cool pass to have in your renders. If you want to tweak it later, you can put it, you can have more fog, less fog, anything in between. So this is where our renders are. This is how our clouds. Let me just quickly show you the clouds. Clouds render. That's how our clouds look like. And clouds and volumes are very similar in the way you would render them. Let's just quickly preview that one. I specifically wanted them to look like rainy clouds, so they're a bit more streaky downwards, just so it feels like it was actually raining, and it creates a bit more mood and atmosphere in that way. And they're not really clouds. This is more like a foggy cloud pass. So here, if you look at here, again, in our renders, I'm separating everything. That's going to give us full control later. Even the sparks, if we go, I put their frame. Let's check. Sparks. Yeah, sure, they're here. Render sparks. They're also separate, and then we just plug everything and combine them on top. Specifically with sparks, you need to render them usually at a higher resolution, and you have to crank up the samples so you get every every spark visible. Otherwise, some of them are too thin to be visible in the render. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I can think of. Oh, another thing. There's a thing called a geolight, and I just wanted to quickly show you how that looks like and what it does, because it's a very important light. Let's get to it. So our geolight here, this is what we're using. We're essentially taking our volume, converting it to geometry. You can see we actually have polygons here and caching that out. The reason we do that is we can use that data in our geolight here. And this will just use a mesh essentially here and plug in your mesh like so. And what that will do is, it's our geolight here. It's going to be a bit slow to render, but it's definitely worth it because that will actually give us the right illumination coming from our explosion. And that's quite important, you know. If the explosion is quite bright, you need everything else to be illuminated by that explosion. And that is something you render separately as well, just because you can see it's quite slow, and we don't need this for the whole 400 frames. We just need this for those, 15 frames where the explosion is actually active. And yeah, that's how that looks like. All right, I think we covered pretty much everything. This is the scene when everything is cleaned out and kind of you put notes so other people know how to access it. But yeah, in terms of LookDev, I think we went through everything. We covered how to apply shaders, how to apply lights, how to render things, how to create different AOVs. And now we're gonna combine everything, go into compositing and finish our CG project. All right, let's do it.